Welcome. How are you?
I'm good.
So
So it's
excited.
always wonderful to see you.
Yeah, same here. I was just going to say the same thing. I am excited to sit down and pick your brain a little bit on a lovely topic of sustainability, which seems to be gaining a lot more attention and traction in events and conferences, especially in the tech space where sustainability is a big initiative across the board. But before we dive into that conversation, tell people a little bit about yourself since I know you really well, but not everyone knows you. So, how did you stumble into the world of event planning and specifically like food and beverage management as a specialty?
Some might say it was bad luck. However, but I think it's really my love of hospitality. There's nothing more enjoyable to me than sitting down and having a great food or a great cocktail with friends and individuals and really getting to know them. I have been doing event planning for 40 years, spanning across the hotel side, the corporate side, and most recently the freelance side.
Sure.
And sustainability became a really significant passion of mine in about 2008. It began, and it was after the movie An Inconvenient Truth.
I,
I was gutted
yeah,
with the polar bear scene.
yep.
And the irony, the next day, I was literally leaving to go on a business trip. I was still with McDonald's at the time, to Lisbon, Portugal. And as we pulled up to the hotel, Al Gore was on a speaking tour and literally walked out of the hotel. And I thought, if this isn't a sign
Sure.
that I'm supposed to be doing something, um, and got rather emotional in seeing him.
Yeah.
And it's been something I've been passionate about since then, and was really fortunate at McDonald's for the 8 additional years that I was there to really drive and implement the sustainability program in their events department. But what was really unique for us was an opportunity to partner with the sustainability team, corporate social responsibility team, and really figure out how to implement some of the initiatives that McDonald's was facing in the restaurants, doing a
Sure.
test pilot at some of our larger events to kind of work through some of the kinks.
Yeah.
So, a very close partnership between operations and events really drove what we did. And I think it contributed to why we were so successful in what we did in that era.
That's incredible. I had no idea about the Al Gore story, so I
Yeah.
learned something new today. That's awesome. And let's go back to 2008, and like sustainability wasn't the buzzword as it is today.
No.
Um, Carbon as a term wasn't
Widely
something we were
utilized or
tracking,
understood
right? Yeah,
even.
yep. So talk to me a little bit about like what when you were starting to get passionate about sustainability in 2008, like what did that even look like in terms of communication and practice and like, yeah, anything come to mind?
The first thing was really education.
Sure.
I had to educate myself because I really didn't know. And I had some great mentors, some incredible organizations that were willing to help raise my awareness and understand all of the lingo that kind of went into it. And when I started, it wasn't just food and beverage, it was kind of across all um, aspects. And we were really focused on our worldwide convention, which was about 15,000 people. At the time was pretty much solely based in Orlando. So we had an opportunity to really dig in with our suppliers and understand some year over year metrics.
Yep.
But the good thing was, I think it was such a just becoming a hotter topic then that people knew it was going to become more important. So those people that were engaged were really willing to say, I don't know if it's going to work, but let's try. Like they were willing to stick, go out on the branch with me and figure out. We did full analysis of all of our substrates off the exhibit floor. And thankfully, some waste partners in Freeman all had great resources that help provide information And the more we talked about it, the more they talked about it. And it really became a snowball effect
Sure.
until there were some really incredible key leaders out there, like Jeff Chase from Freeman, who was their chief sustainability officer. And the things that he implemented there that started with some of the core things we were doing were really exciting. And
So what I'm
proud
hearing
of all.
from that is like it had to start somewhere, and you have to establish kind of like the baseline to track to in order for there to be these experiments that drive sustainability forward to an extent. Is that kind of like the approach that was taken a little bit?
Yeah, we initially we weren't as focused on metrics
Okay,
because we were really trying to figure out what we could do
sure.
and how we do it, right? Like let's in not certain of the exact year, but a new landfill was opening up in the Orlando community, and they had a pretty significant composting program that was going on. And prior to Worldwide, they did not have clearance to take meat or dairy products.
Okay.
But we campaigned with the Orange County Environmental District, the waste hauler themselves, and we got a dispensation to utilize both in their compost for the duration of the show as a test pilot program. So in that instance, we weren't necessarily interested about tracking metrics. It was about how can we engage more partners? How can
Yeah.
we get them to think more sustainably in their efforts? And how can we support them with this moment in time um, of food waste, expo floor waste, giveaways, etc. And a lot of wonderful things came to be. It's also how we were early adopters of Clean the World and the soap reclamation.
Yeah.
They were still grinding soap in Sean's garage when we started with them, and now they're a global organization. And I'm really proud of how we supported them in there.
And those, like, what I love most about you, one of the things that I love most about you is like you never set your sights at like the little incremental change. It's always like, how can I create new legislation? Like, how can I create an organization that didn't exist before and turn them into this global entity? So I what I'm hearing from you is like, yeah, we went big. We said like, let's trial this program that can become a thing to accept meat and dairy into
Yeah,
your
yeah.
composting program. How would you even go about starting that conversation with your suppliers, with your stakeholders? Kind of like what goes into that?
Um, the first question I usually ask is there anything on your radar from a sustainability mission that you've always wanted to try, but maybe haven't had a vendor that's been willing to engage you with it? I can't guarantee we're going to do it, but I'm certainly all ears. How can we help you further your initiatives with a way in which we can contribute?
Got
And
it.
that I think has prompted a lot of thought-provoking conversations. And it really, in my opinion, all comes back to education. We don't know what we don't know. And the sustainability field is an ever-changing landscape, as specifically in the waste arena, as to what municipalities or waste haulers will take based on guidelines, resources for disposal of any of those elements that are going downstream, be it waste, something that's recycled, or something that's composted. It's changing on a daily basis, and what may be accepted today in a certain municipality may not be accepted after January 1. So
Yeah.
it's you always kind of have to stay current to know that what you're focusing on and what you're doing really has an ultimate impact in the end.
And what you just touched on was in terms of composting specifically, like geography dictates a lot of what you are
Mhm.
able to do, right?
Correct.
Like there are cities out there that have great composting programs. There are cities out there that don't compost at all, right? And there's third parties that you bring in to kind of help that, but the rules of what you can and can't compost are different based on that. So to your
Yep.
point, like educating the entirety of the team of what is even capable is a project in and of itself, right?
Very much
So
so.
what like especially kind of flash forwarding to today, I feel like there's so many corporate entities who want to do better. And then you get some of this quote unquote greenwashing that's happening of like, here is how we are doing the things to drive the data point and the flashy this and that. But what we're talking about is how do we approach these from a logistics standpoint to bring about actual change when it comes to sustainability, right?
Yeah. Food waste is actually the third largest greenhouse gas emitter globally, only behind China and the US. So it's a phenomenally awful, huge number
Yeah.
that if we can chip away at this, everyone in our own homes to the events that we're doing, it has the opportunity to make a really significant impact in reducing greenhouse gases, because it's not just what you're serving today or how you dispose of it. You have to think of everything from how it's grown, how it's harvested, how it's transported, how it's cooked, how it's cooled. And then there's the entire back half end of it. Where is it going? How do you get it there?
Yeah.
Greenhouse
Yeah.
gases in landfill is it's a staggering number. And if you want more data, Refeed has a lot of that on their website. You can go and do some research, and it's shocking.
Yeah. Uh, let's get into kind of speeding up to today. As we are planning one of these citywide conferences or these, huge events that are filling up an entire convention center, like what is that checklist of things that are coming out of stakeholder conversations that uh, you have the playbook on, and where like someone who hasn't done this before, where would you guide them into? Do you start with compostable disposables and uh, best practices? Like where do you start that journey?
I think the first step is education. And even for the planner going into a new venue, you really need to understand what is that facility already doing and what are they doing well, and how can you enhance their initiatives with your event, right? So, and asking that question, is there anything they've wanted to do? They may have a ripe, ready answer for
Yeah.
how you can engage and become involved. But it's also understanding not just what the hotel is doing, but is there an environmental issue that's currently impacting the city or the area of the country or the world that you're in? Water is a big challenge for much of the Western US, fresh water. So being mindful of not doing pre-poured water glasses is a really simple low-hanging fruit when you're in Vegas or
Yep.
in Phoenix, to make an impact and offer it. You're not necessarily taking anything away. And that's one of the big challenges I think a lot of planners have, that hospitality is perceived that you always have more than enough for everybody. You're not going to run out, and people
Yeah.
can have every healthy or guilty pleasure they may want. Sustainability peels that back a little bit, and it's a bit of a mind shift in how you approach what you're offering.
And
We
in
feel we need food 24/7
Yep.
for our attendees, and that's really not the case.
And in those conversations where there is this dual standard of we can't run out of anything, but we still want to be sustainable, like what sort of messaging or conversations have you been within earshot or driving that go into like, do attendees understand sustainability initiatives? Are they appreciative of it? Or is it still a like, yeah, that's nice, but give me my pre-poured glass of water?
It's a mixed bag. I think a lot of it depends on the corporate culture of the host organization. If it's internal employees and its sustainability is a key tenet of how that company operates, the acceptability, the understanding is significantly greater than when it's a public facing event. Um, Communicating what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think has incredible opportunities to reduce some of that blowback that you may get. And that can come from information in the know before you go communications, something in the mobile app. We've even done As guests come into a large room, they may see the menu of what's being served, but as they're departing, the flip side of that sign has information about the sustainability initiatives that we're tying into the food and beverage experience, and how they're contributing to it by what they're doing.
Yeah.
Additionally, information that the planner can source from one year to the next will help right size some of the orders that he or she does.
Yep.
So in many instances, the guest may never know that you're scaling back because you're just putting out what historical consumption has proven from the prior year.
And Julie, not a selfless plug here or anything. Like, how do you track that information?
um, I'm really excited about the opportunities that Folio can bring forward to us because if you're partnering with a third party agency, the things that they're looking for are the number of meals that you serve on reusable china, silver, and glassware as opposed to disposable. Folio has the ability to help provide that data with us rather than having to go back and analyze every single
Yeah.
event. It's an easy tracking of packaged elements. If you want to know a percentage of the food service that you've provided that may come in packaging,
Yep.
How do you reduce that year over year? If you've ordered 1,000 packaged elements this year, but only 500 were consumed, you can reduce that for 500 next year's, and that's a direct savings, both in food and in the wrapper waste of what you're doing. So quick calculation as to the amount of water saved with water jugs. I mean, there's so many elements. I think it's kind of exciting to be taking some of these learnings and now implementing them into Folio, because I think this is a conversation and a communication that's going to continue to grow.
And on that note, like best practice for capturing this data in the moment. When your team of food and beverage managers is 10 deep and they are spread across 4 properties, I think we've developed some really great standards of capturing data in real time. And I think that's something that not every planning organization is doing to the full extent that they can. Can you talk a little bit about like what goes into capturing actuals on site and making sure that you're collecting as much of that data in real time as possible?
It happens in a couple of veins. One that I personally wish we could do better was visually laying eyes on consumption after an event.
Sure.
When you're in 4 hotels and there's 10 people and you're on 3 floors and there's 17 functions happening, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not always easy to get back and make an assessment that the 50 sandwiches, 25 bags of chips, etc., have all been consumed to right size that. So some of that you have to rely on the flip side, which is the consumption reports that come back to you from the hotels on the final banquet checks, and having the ability to literally put those numbers back into Folio as we're reviewing the final checks, I think is going to really significantly reduce the amount of over ordering that we need to do to kind of reduce what needs to come to the hotel, which has the, upstream effect of
Yeah.
reducing what's ultimately produced. So yeah, it's pretty exciting, and I think
Yep.
it's going to yield great results.
And that capturing the data, right? Whether it be its data is only as good as the people using it, right? And so taking that into your next year's program or taking that information into a different but similar event, that for you to touch as many programs as you do in a year are the reason why AI can't replace what we do, right? Like
Right.
it is you from your experience, from the data that you've synthesized, that you are going to take this learning into, we need this many dozen for this amount of this group, and we can have a sustainability impact in that, right?
Yep. And you also need to kind of not just look at that number as an individualized consumption. You also have to take a step back and look at the kind of the holistic vision of what that day looked like.
Yeah.
Was the afternoon break an hour after lunch, so no food was really consumed because they weren't even hungry yet. Beverages might be high because they're thirsty,
Yep.
but think about the timing of when that event happened from one year to the next, and where is it living this year? Is it still an hour apart? Is it 2.5 hours where people may be a little more hungry? Um, that can have an impact on your ordering. Or if you've got a quick lunch period, eliminate lunch, desserts, move those to the afternoon break, give
Yep.
them that sweet treat along with something healthy and something, maybe a little protein or savory. And you can kind of stretch your dollars a little bit more across the day too.
Yeah,
Um,
both a budgeting and a sustainability,
yep,
right? Like we are reducing food waste by putting that dessert in the PM break. We are uh, stretching our budget
yep,
of instead of paying for that full price for our lunch menu, we now have at least a somewhat cost savings for that to apply to the PM break. Um, and where when we're taking a look at something like uh, beverage dispensers, kind of like the spa water fill up or things like
mhm.
that, versus cans of Coke or bottles of tea. Like where do you ride the line in some of your thought behind there's the quick grab and go aspect, there's the replenishment aspect, the logistics of keeping up with something when we have 10,000 people going through a hallway. What makes sense both from a like logistic standpoint and a sustainability standpoint?
From a logistic, in many instances, they're the same, especially on beverages. Coffee, tea, and decaf, you typically have a relatively short window of time to replenish in many of these. So that is not necessarily a nut you're going to adjust. But the bottled and um, canned products are more sustainable than a plastic bottle, even though it can be recycled. The flip top and the full can be recycled, and now those elements are also available in water. The bulk dispensers, I think, are great if people are aware of them.
Sure.
This year, we ran into a really unique challenge with one of my events where we scaled back on the number of bubblers that we provided because the venue has made an investment in a significant number of built-in water dispensers throughout the corridors in the hallway. So we purposely thought it's now so much more readily available. We didn't need to do the same hallway distribution of water to be available for the guests. And sadly, we took a really significant hit on people saying there wasn't water this year.
Sure.
And in a little bit of a deeper dive, we discovered that the signage is there, but it's subtle
Yep.
and people didn't realize it. So finding a way to highlight in advance or as people are passing it, calling out a little more attention because it is so seamlessly built now into the infrastructure of this facility.
Yep.
People didn't see it. And so they didn't understand that there was just as much, if not more water there, but it was just being dispensed in a different method. So
Yep.
this year we're looking at, do we even provide a water cooler map as to where they are, in addition to some sort of sign marker that refill here?
Mm-hmm.
And then for the areas where we do need to put it, do we do a larger dispensary, so to speak, of multiple water stations there so they know that that's the core spot that they can go to on certain floors if by chance they've missed it from the built-in locations.
Yep. And there is we've gone through this before of like water bottles as a giveaway, right? We have, I think the majority of people have graduated beyond backpacks, right? Now we are into still an occasional water bottle as your
Yep.
registration gift. And that also has an impact on water consumption during the course of your event, because if you are given a water bottle, the first thing you're wanting to do is, oh, I'm thirsty, I'm going to fill it up, and I'm putting 32 ounces of water in that bottle, and it might sit in my bag all day, or I might drink 3 of those because I have this thing now to occupy my time. Talking through a little bit of that connection of this, to your point, if water bottles were the giveaway, that's an opportunity to say, like, we have built-in water stations. Here's your
Yep.
water cooler map with that. A little bit of a double-edged sword with the amount
Yep.
of consumption that will happen for that. But for this property that you're referring to, like, this is an easy way to, instead of again, paying for the additional water bubblers, having the waste of those that aren't used at the end, that are just sitting there for the next program or recirculated or not used. You are at least using the in-house facilities for that as well, right?
Correct.
Um, let's switch topics to this concept of meatless Mondays. Um, and there's a debate that I've had a few times over that the sustainability between offering chicken and offering the beef for this kind of non beef concept, or we take away the protein altogether and we are now doing a veggie forward menu for Monday. Like, is there a sustainability effect to that when you are factoring in things like the amount of water that's needed to wash your produce, to prepare the veggie dishes, or the amount of chickens that can equate to the same amount of protein in a cow?
It's not
You
an
know,
easy
like
metric. It really isn't, because there's so much goes into it. Chicken is more sustainable than beef
mm-hmm.
based on the amount of water and feed required for the two. Also, transport is better with chicken than it is with beef, just on sheer weight. So everything has kind of a trade-off, right? So if beef is the least environmentally friendly, chicken's kind of mid-range, and the vegetables are actually better just for a host of things. I can honestly say I think I've had maybe one or two events that have agreed to do a meatless Monday.
Sure.
I've done it more if that Monday is a staff only day.
Yep.
They're very it's not an easy sell when you have 20,000 other consumers arriving to eat on a Monday. There's a much more hesitancy to do that.
Yeah. And there's a few other isms that, Meatless Monday is one of those. Like a no beef program was one that we entertained last year as well. And like to trickle that down into again, some of those like fundamental changes that without really having to put too much effort into it, you're still having a big impact. Is there anything that comes to mind that these are easy changes that could happen behind the scenes that really have a sustainability impact?
Fewer proteins in general.
Got it.
So many times buffets you'll have a beef, you'll have a chicken, and then you'll have a vegan protein. If you could just cut that back to two options, potentially a vegan protein and one other, that alone helps reduce the environmental footprint, but it also really helps reduce your waste.
Yep.
Because the facilities need to produce such volume, not knowing how many guests are going to eat one protein versus the other. They make a significantly higher quantity than ultimately needed, so they don't run out. So they can provide that hospitable dining experience when you're feeding 20,000 people. So fewer, you don't need 4 salads. Pick two proteins. If one needs to be vegan, great. The other can be chicken or poultry or pork or beef. Like, pick one and a vegan option and kind of let that be. And then vary the protein by day.
Yep. I love that tip. And I think as more awareness is brought to both the dietary side of things and the sustainability side of things, as long as there is the variety to kind of build what you would prefer out of that concept, there is less negative feedback. No one is going through, unless you are serving a barbecue menu and you don't have like a barbecue pork or a barbecue chicken, like they aren't necessarily going to be looking for both of those things in the menu. It is okay to do barbecue chicken and pulled jackfruit, as your vegan alternative. And it still checks the box for the attendee, right? So,
and then if you have beef and a different option the next day, right? So you can rotate through it. will you make everyone happy every day with food and beverage? No.
Yep. We haven't talked about the after an event. Different properties do this differently, and there is a legality of this of what can be donated after a service. So, especially when we are doing large events, it is. Can you speak to a little bit of the best practices that go into engineering the most amount of product that can be donated?
I'm going to give MGMRI a really big shout out here
Yeah.
because they've made some significant investment in blast chillers in their larger hotels, and local partnerships that in many instances, and Venetian Sands too, I have to give them kudos because I think they were one of the first with food donation partners. And Vegas has really done this better than many communities out there. Orlando does a good job at the convention center, but having the awareness before your first meals are ever served as to what you want to do and what the capabilities of the property are really kind of helps set you up for success. Um, if you can minimize what you're ordering, yes, you will contribute less, but what you're contributing, if you think about it from the beginning, you're going to boost what can be captured. I
Yep.
think Refeed estimates that there's 1 billion meals wasted
That's a billion is
annually.
a huge number, you know.
Like it's staggering. And the statistics that they say by 2050, we're going to need 50% more food to feed the masses in 2050. But currently we're wasting about 38% of our food of what is currently being produced. So having to increase by 50% is a huge impact on land and methane and water and
Yeah.
energy to produce that. But if we only need to produce 12% because we've repurposed and reallocated in being less wasteful with that 38%, just imagine what that impact
Yep.
could be. You know, a lot of the food banks in in the cities that I work in, they don't always have nighttime collections. But if you've got a welcome reception or a late night event, many of them, if you partner with them and you have the dialogue in advance, they will schedule someone to come capture that food at the end of your event if the facility doesn't have a blast chiller that they can bring the temp back down, store it safely overnight, and distribute it the next day.
Yep. And can
So
you break down that process just for those who aren't familiar with like what typically goes into once a service is concluded, none of the food that is actually on the floor can be donated.
correct.
Most often, sure, it can be repurposed kind of for staff meal if there was a hotel pan that was just put out and then it's taken back and eaten in real time.
Correct.
But in order for it to be donated, what are the steps that need to
Typically,
happen?
donation begins if the food's been under safe conditions, still refrigerated in the back, still in a hot box. Once that food is no longer needed for service, um, many facilities, especially the larger convention centers, have the ability to do that breakdown right at the back of the halls. So they will either repan, repackage, and get it in the proper vessel to be chilled and cooled if it needs to be stored. Otherwise, it's just repackaged, and in many instances, it can go right out the door.
Yep.
McCormick here in Chicago, the kitchens for a food recovery group are right on site at McCormick. So anything that's left goes from the show floor directly down to their kitchens, and it can be feeding someone in that municipality that evening.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing. A lot of the larger convention centers are really stepping up. And I don't want people to be dissuaded or discouraged by the fear and the big misnomer that being sustainable costs more.
Sure.
You can find things, you know, if you're just getting into this that are low hanging fruit that don't really cost you anymore. And many of the things that you may want to do if the venue's got a process already in place, find out how you can build upon that and then write some of those elements into your contract.
Yep.
Well, with Mandalay Bay, we ask for fully compostable water cups that go with these water coolers that we put out, because the standard version is now something that the municipality waste hauler no longer takes.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I think you're coming back to this message of like it starts at time of sourcing your venue, right? It doesn't start at time of we are now moving into food and beverage planning. Sure, there are steps along the way that you can take, but when we are thinking about our location for this event in 4 years from now or 6 years from now, like sustainability, in order for this to really take hold and for us to capture that, needs to be a part of that conversation from the get-go, right?
Yep, very much so.
And then it's a much easier trickle down because it's already been a part of the dialogue versus you are contracted to come in and run sustainability and the show is 2 months away. Like there isn't going to be as much that you can do in that time, especially if it's something like, oh, well, we have a 6 week lead time on just purchasing compostables. Like those are the things that not everyone thinks about when we're doing these larger programs, is just the amount of time it takes for even someone to source and procure some of these compostable products.
Right. And I really don't want people to be dissuaded by that either, right?
Sure.
When in my days at McDonald's, um, I took a lot of abuse when I was up in public speaking and being a visible face of sustainability at McDonald's. But what really bothered me was I felt that the things that we do well and did well then, we didn't always tell our own stories often enough or loud enough because of the fear of being labeled a greenwasher.
Sure.
But everyone's got to walk before they run, right? And if you're trying really hard to do something, don't let that naysayer dissuade you. As long as you're kind of continually moving forward with your initiatives from one year to the next, be proud of what you're doing. It
Yeah.
may be a small impact today, but the request you make may change the facility. They in turn can implement those practices with all of their other clients.
Yep.
And your single one-off event has the potential multiplier effect to make a significant difference in one venue or one city that has a longer legacy.
Yeah. Thank you for kind of playing both sides of that dialogue, because it both sides are important. The earlier you can get in, the bigger the impact I think you can have. But if you're 2 weeks out and it's now just the time that someone has raised the flag on sustainability, there is still something you can do. And for a lot of these properties, unless you from the planner or client side are advocating for the use of it, like they are going to be taking the path of least resistance, and they may have put together the operational procedures for what should be happening when someone is advocating for sustainability, but they may not have put it into practice, and you're giving them the opportunity to do another rep, so to speak, get it, make it that much easier for their team to get used to something like that, right?
And there are organizations out there, both from the meeting planning side with a very dedicated sustainability lens, such as Meet Green, who I'm going to plug, who helped me
Yeah.
metrically analyze what we were doing at McDonald's. And they are also being utilized by many of the tech companies that I've had the pleasure of working with. But there's also organizations like Feeding America, that will come in and partner with you in these cities. In Miami, we found a great little small not-for-profit local organization that came in and helped with our compost when we were there last year. And it was one of the first times they had been in the building. So
Yeah.
if your food service purveyor has a sustainability point of contact at a corporate level or within their building, make them your friend. They're the ones that are going to tell you, this is what we do, this is what we can do. And they're the best person to ask that age-old question of, is there anything you've wanted to do that you haven't had a client that's been
Yep.
right? Like,
And then I would
I
encourage you prompted me to do this at a program that we were doing is go see it in action. And honestly, it's one of the coolest things to actually go see it happen in real time, right? When you are seeing the walk-in with a, pallet
yeah,
full of box lunches that are being very methodically brought out to the floor so that they can maximize the amount of donation that they can have at
yeah,
the end of it, and you are seeing in the kitchen and the dishwashing station when we're talking about thousands of people eating, the composting piece of it of I'm going into a
yeah,
separate bucket and that bucket is going into a separate dock, like at scale. Operationally, it's incredible to see in
yeah.
action.
And at Sands and Venetian Palazzo, they sort on site every day.
Yeah.
And it was a really humbling experience. The first time I was down on the dock seeing it, I thought, oh dear God, there's so much stuff. But they were doing amazing things with it. And the waste stream isn't just thinking about what the post-consumer piece is. There's a ton of waste in the production element too. So don't forget about the before it ever hits that chafing dish or
Yep.
it hits the AM break. There's a series of food handling waste, organics, packaging, etc., that all exist before you ever lay eyes on it.
Yeah.
And many times the facilities have that integrated already into their systems because it's a cost. It can be a cost savings for them. But over the years, there's been a lot of really enterprising organizations that have stepped in to help fill this role. The pig farmer in Vegas took the scraps 20 years ago before it was even cool. But for
Yeah.
him, it was a way to reduce what he needed to buy to feed the pigs. So we've all seen him on, Dirtiest Jobs, but um, he was also the original recycler in Vegas, I think, with bottles and glass.
Yep. And there is someone out there, especially more so than ever, who is willing to be a partner in that journey. And that's the other cool piece of it right now is that back to your soap maker, right? Like it is someone out there is looking for the scraps. It's our job from the
Yeah.
planning perspective to connect the dots to make sure that it is an available resource from the meeting that you're doing that is producing some of this overage and waste. And if it can have a home, it's better
Uh-huh.
than going in a landfill, right?
Yeah, reduce really needs to be the first and driving force, with recycle and compost as the secondary.
Yeah.
Like, and that's logical to play across every field. And there's so many, new things now in mass that may not have been there. Like we moved in many instances to Keurigs a few years ago, just to not have to continually replenish gallons of coffee. It's kind of made a la minute. And we all were struggling with the pods.
Mm-hmm.
But now Keurig and even Nespresso have collection opportunities that you can collect those elements, recycle them, and send them back. A little awareness in the offices where you're putting these things, you can turn something that had a potential negative, turn it around into a positive.
Yep. And I've seen at some events as well, like someone manning the trash station to do that moment of education of like, because if I'm coming from somewhere, a location that isn't forward in recycling messaging and composting messaging. Like, I don't know necessarily what goes into the green bin or what goes into the blue bin, or right. So to have someone there as kind of an engagement to say, here's what's going into this, back to your point of like the water cooler
Yeah.
map, this is another available opportunity for planners to engage their attendees. And those are the things that you're going to walk away being like, I learned something about composting from this tech conference today that I had no idea that I was signing up for, and I think keeping an eye out for those little moments throughout the attendee
Yeah.
experience can be super impactful as well.
I completely agree. And I also feel that sustainability just goes beyond the normal things. It's also, caring for the people in the community where you're doing it.
Yep.
So, are any of the initiatives that you're doing um, an opportunity to bring good, give back? We worked with the Orange County Environmental Protection District many years ago, and it was a little bit before like carbon offsets were happening.
Mhm.
And we actually created a fund that the EPA was able to give grants to homeowners that were putting in solar water heaters from what we funded at McDonald's that had a continued effect. So
Sure.
it was we benefited the local community rather than just paying something that may have planted trees
Yep.
either somewhere in Florida or in the rainforest. But we really focused on how can we do the most good right here,
Yeah.
and the carbon that we're generating by our event, how can we offset it here in the community where we're hosting you?
I think that's a perfect way to take action into what is in your year ahead. And I think anyone who is going to listen back to this episode will have a wealth of knowledge of things that they can take to the next meeting that they are doing and the meeting they are planning 6 years from now.
Yeah,
So,
and if my contact info's up, I love to talk trash. I got a lot of
in
resources.
more ways than one. No.
Yes, this is true. But if I can help anybody demystify it, because it's hard when if you're just starting on this journey to know where to begin. And I say there's no wrong place to begin. But if I can help anybody in that process and help kind of make the events industry a little more greener, I'm happy to do so.
Awesome. It has been a pleasure to have this time
As
with you.
always.
Thank you so much for all of your insight and all of the good work you're doing for the world in general. So, yep, we will be sure to share out the organizations that you're mentioning here in the show notes. And then, if you're willing, I'm happy to put your information out there as well so people can get in touch.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Julie.
Thank you. Happy holidays.